The email notification popped up on my screen at exactly 8:45 a.m. Subject: Urgent meeting now. From Richard Carcencio. To Amelia Davis. I stared at it for a few seconds, my fingers tightening around my coffee mug. I had been working at Carson and Company for 6 years, and in all that time, Richard Carson had never once sent me a direct email. A bad feeling curled in my stomach. I glanced around the open plan office. My coworkers were busy, their eyes glued to their screens. No one seemed to have received the same urgent summons. This was personal. With a deep breath, I grabbed my notepad and made my way to Richard's office. His glass walls offered a full view of the entire floor, making it impossible to hide the fact that I had been called in. I caught Daniel's concerned look from his desk, and I gave him a small shrug before stepping inside. Richard didn't look up. He was seated behind his massive oak desk, flipping through a folder, his fingers tapping impatiently. His office smelled like expensive leather and overpriced cologne, just like him. "Close the door," he said coldly. I did, my heartbeat quickening. Finally, he lifted his head, his blue eyes as sharp as ever. "Sit." I sat. Richard leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Amelia, let's not waste time. Your performance has been disappointing." My fingers stiffened around my notepad. "Excuse me." He exhaled loudly like I was exhausting him just by existing. "I've been reviewing your work and I'm not impressed." That was a lie. A bold-faced, blatant lie. I was one of the hardest-working employees at this firm. I had landed some of Carson and Company's biggest clients. I had sacrificed nights, weekends, and even vacations to ensure deadlines were met. And now he was telling me I wasn't good enough? I kept my voice steady. "Richard, I've handled some of our most important accounts. Just last quarter He waved a hand dismissively. "Those clients would have come to us anyway. You didn't do anything special." I stared at him, my blood running cold. I had spent years going above and beyond, making sure clients stayed loyal to this firm. And now Richard was acting like I was nothing? Like I had contributed nothing? This wasn't about my performance. This was personal. "What exactly are you saying?" I asked, forcing my voice to remain calm. Richard leaned forward, lacing his fingers together. "I'm saying, Amelia, that you should start looking for another job. Because honestly, I don't see a future for you here." Just like that. I felt the weight of his words settle over me, pressing against my ribs. A few months ago, this conversation would have crushed me. It would have sent me spiraling, questioning my worth, wondering what I could have done better. But now I realized something. Richard had underestimated me. And that was his biggest mistake. I stood up slowly, tucking my notepad under my arm. "You know what, Richard? You don't have to fire me." His eyes narrowed. "Oh. I quit." Silence. For the first time, Richard looked caught off guard. He had expected me to beg, to cry, to plead for my job. Instead, I had taken control. "You're quitting?" he repeated as if he hadn't heard me correctly. "That's right." I gave him the coldest smile I could muster. "You think I'm incompetent? Fine. Let's see how well your company does without me." His jaw twitched, but he quickly masked it with another smirk. "You won't last a month without this firm." I tilted my head. "We'll see." Then I turned on my heel and walked out. I didn't slam the door. I didn't need to. Because the best revenge was coming. The office felt different as I walked back to my desk. Like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders, but at the same time, an unsettling energy filled the air. People had noticed. Richard's office was all glass. Everyone had seen me go in. Everyone had seen me walk out. Now they were watching me. I ignored the stares, grabbed a cardboard box from the supply room and started packing my things. Pens, notebooks, my framed picture of my parents. My heart clenched a little as I placed the photo inside the box. My parents had always told me I was destined for great things. Would they be proud of me right now? Or worried that I had just walked away from my only source of income? The whispers started almost immediately. Did she just quit? I heard Richard fired her. Wow. After all the work she's done. I bit the inside of my cheek, refusing to let their words get to me. Let them talk. I didn't owe this place a single tear. Daniel appeared at my desk, his expression unreadable. "You okay?" I placed my stapler into the box and let out a breath. I should have done this a long time ago. His brows furrowed. "Do you have something lined up?" I glanced up at him and smiled. I'm starting my own firm. Daniel blinked. Wait, what? You heard me. I closed the box and lifted it into my arms. I've spent 6 years making Richard's company successful. It's time I do the same for myself. His eyes flickered with something, admiration, maybe a little shock. Amelia, starting a business isn't easy. I know. Do you have funding? Clients? A plan? Not yet. But I will. He exhaled. You're serious about this? Dead serious. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, glancing around like he was making a decision in his head. Then after a beat he said, if you need help, let me know. That was enough for me. With one last look around the office, I walked out. The first thing I did when I got home was grab a fresh notebook and write down my plan. Goal: build my own consulting firm. Challenges: no office. No clients. No funding. Opportunities: I know Richard's weaknesses. Clients trust me more than him. I have the skills and knowledge to do this. I stared at the page, letting the reality sink in. This wasn't going to be easy. I had no safety net, no steady paycheck. I was starting from nothing. But I had one advantage. Richard Carson had underestimated me. And that was his mistake. I spent the next week laying down the foundation of my business. 1. Registered my business. It was nothing flashy yet, but I officially registered Davis Consulting. It was a simple name, but it had power. It had my name. 2. Set up my workspace. My tiny apartment became my office. My dining table was my desk. My laptop was my lifeline. 3. Built a website and social media presence. If I wanted to compete, I had to be visible. I created a sleek website showcasing my expertise. I set up LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter pages. Then I tackled the biggest challenge: clients. I knew Richard's company inside and out. I knew which clients were unhappy. I knew why they were unhappy. So I started making calls. Not sales calls. Conversations. I reached out to old clients asking how they were doing. Checking in. Listening. I didn't badmouth Richard. I didn't have to. I let them talk. And guess what? They wanted to talk. One client, Mr. Harper, a high-profile real estate investor, sighed heavily over the phone. Richard's team has been slow lately. I don't feel like they prioritize us anymore. Another client, a tech startup CEO, groaned, we've been getting generic strategies. No real solutions. It's like they don't even try. I took notes. I listened to every frustration, every complaint. Then once they finished venting, I simply said, well, if you ever need a more personal approach, I've started my own firm. I'd love to help. And just like that, the first domino fell. Mr. Harper became my first official client. The tech CEO followed a week later. Then another. And another. One by one, Richard's clients started leaving him. Step 4, the first blow. 2 months after I quit, I got a call from Daniel. You need to see this, he said. We met at a coffee shop and he slid his phone across the table. Richard had just posted a desperate message on LinkedIn. To our valued clients. Due to unforeseen circumstances, we are restructuring. We appreciate your patience during this transition. I smirked. Richard was scrambling. His company was bleeding clients. And the best part? He had no idea it was me. But he was about to find out. Starting a business was nothing like working for one. At Carson & Company, I had a salary, resources, and a team to fall back on. Now every decision, every risk, every success or failure was mine alone. There was no safety net. But I had something stronger: determination. I had spent years making Richard's company successful. Now it was time to pour that same effort into my own. I wasn't just trying to survive. I was trying to win. The first month was brutal. My apartment was my office, my laptop was my command center, and my phone became my lifeline. There were no IT departments to fix software issues, no assistants to schedule meetings, and no marketing teams to bring in clients. It was just me. I spent 14 hours a day working, sending emails, updating my website, researching strategies, and reaching out to potential clients. There were moments of doubt. Moments when the silence felt overwhelming. What if this didn't work? What if I failed? But then I reminded myself. Richard called me incompetent. And that single thought fueled me. Since I didn't have an office, I made it a selling point. I keep costs low so I can offer personalized, high-quality service without corporate markups. Since I didn't have a team, I emphasized my hands-on approach. You'll work directly with me, not some junior executive who barely understands your business. Every so-called weakness became a strength. I focused on what I knew best, Richard's clients. I didn't just offer them better service. I offered them something Richard never did: respect. I remembered their birthdays. I followed up on their concerns. I didn't send generic reports. I provided solutions tailored to their specific needs. It worked. Within 3 months I had 5 solid clients. By month 4 I had 10. Richard's company was bleeding money. And I was thriving. One day, I received an email from a potential client. Subject: consultation request, urgent. I opened it and nearly choked on my coffee. It was from Harrison and Locke, a multi-million-dollar corporation. One of Richard's biggest clients. They wanted to meet. I took a deep breath, smoothing my blazer as I stepped into their downtown office for the meeting. This was it. The receptionist led me to a conference room where the CEO, Mr. Locke, sat with his executive team. "Miss Davis," he said, shaking my hand. "We've heard good things." I smiled. "I'm glad to hear that." He leaned forward. "Tell me, what makes your firm different?" I met his gaze. "I don't treat clients like numbers. I don't recycle strategies. I offer something Richard Carson never did: real commitment." He nodded slowly. "Impressive. We're considering moving our account." Inside I was screaming. Outside I remained calm. That would be an excellent decision. 3 weeks later I signed the contract. Harrison and Locke left Richard. And just like that, my small business became a serious threat to Carson and Company. The best part? Richard still didn't know it was me. But he was about to find out. The moment Richard discovered that his former clients were now working with me was a moment I savored. It wasn't immediate. It took months of steady client losses, dwindling revenue, and growing frustration before he finally realized what was happening. The first sign came when he tried to call Harrison and Locke to discuss their upcoming strategy. They refused the meeting. Instead, they told him in no uncertain terms that they were no longer interested in Carson and Company's services. Richard was stunned. "Who are you working with now?" he demanded. The response? "Davis Consulting." Richard froze. Davis. Amelia Davis. The woman he had dismissed, humiliated, and driven out of his company. I imagine his face went red. His fists clenched. His ego took a direct hit. He had underestimated me. Richard tried everything to stop the bleeding. He slashed his prices, offering desperate discounts. He fired half his staff, blaming them for the losses. He rebranded his company, trying to regain credibility. Nothing worked. Because the problem wasn't his staff, his pricing, or his branding. The problem was him. Clients weren't leaving just because of better service. They were leaving because they had never trusted him in the first place. And the moment they had an alternative, me, they took it. One afternoon my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. A familiar voice greeted me. "Richard." Well, he said, his tone dripping with forced amusement. "Looks like you've been busy." I smiled. "Richard. What a surprise." "I'll cut to the chase," he said, his voice tightening. "You've stolen my clients." I laughed. "I didn't steal them. You lost them." Silence. Then his voice dropped to a warning tone. "Do you really think you can win this game, Amelia?" "I'm not playing a game," I said. "I'm running a business. A successful one." His anger slipped through. "You're just a startup. You can't compete with me." "I already am," I said smoothly. "And based on what I've heard, you're struggling." Richard was breathing heavily now. I had him. "This isn't over," he spat. "I built Carson and Company from the ground up. You're nothing but an overambitious former employee who got lucky." I leaned back in my chair. Luck had nothing to do with it. Then I hung up. 2 weeks later, Daniel quit. Richard's most loyal employee. The one who had warned me to be careful. But now, he was done. And the best part? He called me. "Amelia," he said over the phone, "I want in." That's when I knew. Carson and Company was finished. I knew it was only a matter of time before Richard would come to me directly. His pride wouldn't let him suffer in silence. When Carson and Company started bleeding clients, he had tried damage control. When that failed, he had tried intimidation. Now, with his company on the verge of collapse, he was out of options. So when I received an unexpected invitation to a networking event hosted by the city's top business leaders, I wasn't surprised to see Richard's name on the guest list. I knew exactly why he would be there. And I was ready. The event was held at a luxury hotel downtown. Crystal chandeliers, soft jazz music, and an open bar filled with high-end scotch. The kind of setting where Richard used to own the room. But not tonight. Tonight he was a man scrambling to save face. I spotted him from across the room, deep in conversation with a potential investor. His suit was still expensive, but there was something different about him now. The confidence was gone. The way he kept adjusting his tie, the tightness in his jaw, he was struggling. And then he saw me. For a moment he just stared. I smiled and raised my champagne glass in a small salute. He clenched his jaw and walked straight toward me. "Amelia," he said smoothly, forcing a polite smile. "I was hoping I'd run into you." I took a sip of my drink. "I'm sure you were." He exhaled sharply. "Let's talk somewhere private." I let him lead me to a quieter corner of the venue. Not because I was intimidated, because I wanted to hear him beg. He turned to face me, and for a moment, I saw something I had never seen before in Richard Carson's eyes. Desperation. "I'll be direct," he said. He gestured vaguely at me, my success, everything I had built. "This has gone far enough." I raised an eyebrow. "Has it?" His nostrils flared. "You've made your point. You've stolen my clients, damaged my company." I cut him off. "I didn't steal anything. They chose me." His face darkened. "We can put all of this behind us. I'm willing to offer you a position." I laughed. Actually laughed. "A position?" I repeated, amused. "At your failing company? Are you serious?" His expression hardened. "Don't be arrogant, Amelia. You wouldn't have gotten anywhere without what you learned from me." I stepped closer, looking him dead in the eye. "What I learned from you," I said softly, "was exactly what not to do." Silence. He wasn't used to being spoken to like that. I tilted my head. "Tell me, Richard, how much longer do you think Carson and Company can survive?" His jaw tightened. "I'll rebuild." I smiled. "No, you won't." Because he had already lost. His clients were gone. His best employees had jumped ship. His reputation was in ruins. He knew it. I knew it. And for the first time I saw fear in his eyes. He had always believed he was untouchable. But now, I had beaten him at his own game. He swallowed hard, trying to keep control. "Enjoy this while it lasts, Amelia. Because success," he leaned in slightly, "doesn't last forever." I held his gaze. "Neither does failure." With that, I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there. A broken man in a collapsing empire. Richard Carson had spent years believing he was untouchable. Now his company was on life support. And I was thriving. Davis Consulting had gone from a small startup in my apartment to a recognized name in the industry. My client list had tripled, and I had secured contracts that Richard could only dream of. What started as a fight for survival had turned into something bigger. A legacy. I finally moved out of my tiny apartment office and leased a sleek, modern workspace downtown. Hiring my own team was a moment of pure satisfaction. Every resume I reviewed, every interview I conducted reminded me of how far I had come. I didn't just hire anyone. I hired the best. Some of them? Former employees of Carson and Company. People who had been underappreciated just like I was. Now they were working with me, not under me, because I knew that real success wasn't just about power. It was about building something that lasts. One morning I received an email. Subject: Carson and Company declares bankruptcy. I clicked on the link. There it was in black and white. Richard's empire had fallen. Debt, lawsuits, layoffs. He had tried to rebuild. He had tried to outlast me. But in the end he couldn't survive without the people he had once dismissed. He had underestimated me. And that had been his biggest mistake. A few weeks later I was at a corporate event celebrating another major contract. Then I saw him. Richard. His suit wasn't as crisp. His tie wasn't as sharp. There was no arrogance in his posture anymore. Only bitterness. For a moment I almost felt sorry for him. Then I remembered every insult, every dismissal, every time he made me feel like I was nothing. I walked past him without a second glance. Because I had nothing left to prove. I had already won. They say revenge is best served cold. But I had learned something even better. success is the best revenge. Because while Richard Carson faded into obscurity, I was just getting started. The sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office, casting a golden hue over the sleek glass conference table. I leaned back in my chair watching the city skyline, feeling something I never thought I'd feel after what Richard Carson put me through. Peace. Davis Consulting wasn't just surviving, it was dominating. We had expanded beyond the city, landing nationwide clients. Our reputation for excellence had turned us into the firm that companies fought to work with. And Richard Carson? His name had faded into irrelevance. His once mighty firm was nothing but a cautionary tale. But the truth? I had stopped thinking about him. Because he was no longer important. I walked out of my office and into the main workspace. My team was everything I had ever wanted. They weren't just employees, they were partners in success. I had built the kind of company that valued people, rewarded hard work, and nurtured innovation. Where Richard had ruled by fear and arrogance, I led with trust and vision. I wasn't just proving a point anymore. I was building a legacy. As I sipped my coffee, my assistant knocked on my door. "You have an email you might want to see." I raised an eyebrow. "From?" She hesitated. "Richard Carson." I let out a slow breath and turned to my screen. Subject: a proposal. I clicked it open. "Amelia, I won't waste time pretending I don't know how this happened. You outplayed me. You built something that I should have seen coming. I need work. I have experience, connections, and skills that could still be valuable to you. If you're willing to put the past aside, I'd like to discuss an opportunity with you." Richard. I stared at the words on the screen. The man who once called me incompetent was now asking for a job. I leaned back, letting the irony of it sink in. I could have laughed. I could have gloated. I could have sent a scathing response. Instead, I simply typed, "Richard, I appreciate the message. But Davis Consulting has a strict policy. We only hire competent people. Best of luck, Amelia." And with that, I hit send. As I stepped out onto the balcony of my office, I breathed in the crisp morning air. I had built this. From nothing. From rejection. From the ashes of Carson and Company. No. The future was mine. Richard Carson had once been a titan in the industry. He was powerful, respected, and feared. But in the end, his downfall wasn't just about losing clients or money. It was about losing the one thing he had always taken for granted: his power. He had spent his career underestimating people, believing that arrogance and intimidation were enough to keep him on top. He never realized that real success comes from adaptability, innovation, and respect. By the time he did, it was already too late. After I rejected his job request, I heard rumors about him attempting to start another firm. It failed within months. No one wanted to work with him. No one wanted to invest in him. No one trusted him anymore. Without the clients, reputation, and loyal employees he had squandered, he was nothing. The last I heard, he had taken a mid-level consulting job at a small firm, working for someone younger and smarter than him. Meanwhile, Davis Consulting was thriving. We weren't just competing, we were leading. Big clients. Bigger contracts. More expansion. What had once been a desperate attempt to survive had turned into something far greater than I ever imagined. We launched mentorship programs to help young professionals who, like me, had been overlooked and underestimated. We gave chances to people who had the talent but not the connections. We built something that wasn't just about profit. It was about lasting impact. One evening, I found myself standing in front of the office window, looking down at the city lights. It had been a long, brutal road. There were moments I wanted to quit. Moments where the doubt crept in, whispering that maybe Richard was right. But he wasn't. Because I had taken everything he threw at me. Every insult, every dismissal, every moment he made me feel like I was nothing, and I had turned it into fuel. I had won. Not because I had destroyed him, but because I had built something better. Success isn't just about beating the people who doubted you. It's about proving to yourself that they were wrong. Richard Carson thought I was incompetent. Now he was forgotten. The future belongs to me. As Davis Consulting soared, we started attracting international clients. Companies from Europe and Asia reached out, wanting to work with us. It was a surreal moment. Just a year ago, I had been struggling to get by. Now we were negotiating million-dollar contracts and expanding into global markets. But with success came new challenges. Scaling a business wasn't easy. The demand for our services was growing faster than I could have imagined, and I had to make sure we were ready for it. Hiring more employees, training them, managing larger projects, balancing work and life, if I could even call it that anymore. But unlike before, I wasn't alone. I had a team I trusted. And most importantly, I had myself. I no longer doubted my abilities. I no longer second-guessed my decisions. I had built this company from the ground up. And no challenge, no competitor, no obstacle, no Richard Carson wannabe, was going to stop me now. One evening as I was wrapping up a meeting, my assistant knocked on my office door. "Another email you might want to see," she said, smirking. I raised an eyebrow. "Who is it this time?" She handed me her tablet. Subject, "Let's talk." From Richard Carson. I sighed. Curious, I opened it. "Amelia. I made a lot of mistakes. I burned bridges. I let my ego get in the way. I see that now. I know you have no reason to help me. But I also know that you built something incredible, and if there's any chance you're willing to talk, I'd like to meet. No tricks, no games. Just a conversation." "Me know, Richard." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. Richard Carson asking for a meeting. A year ago, I would have jumped at the chance to rub my success in his face. Well, I didn't feel the need. I had already won. I closed the email without responding. Not out of pettiness. Not out of revenge. But because Richard Carson was no longer relevant to my story. He had been a chapter in my life. A painful, frustrating chapter, but just a chapter. The rest of my story? That belonged to me. I stood up, looking out at the city. I wasn't just running a business. I was creating a legacy. Days passed and I never responded to Richard's email. I had nothing to gain from reopening that door. I wasn't the same person he had underestimated. I wasn't driven by anger anymore. I had moved on. But something about his message lingered in my mind, not out of pity but because of what it represented. He was stuck in the past. And I was building the future. Davis Consulting had become a powerhouse in the industry, but I wasn't satisfied with just being successful. I wanted to change the game. So I expanded, not just in size but in vision. We launched an initiative to mentor young entrepreneurs, giving them access to resources I never had when I started. We partnered with universities to create internship programs, helping students gain real-world experience in the industry. We developed cutting-edge strategies that put us ahead of competitors, not just in profits but in impact. And the more we grew, the more I realized something important. Success isn't just about proving people wrong. It's about proving yourself right. One evening, I attended an industry gala, celebrating innovation in business. As I mingled with executives, investors, and rising entrepreneurs, I spotted a familiar face in the crowd. Richard Carson. But this time he wasn't the same man I once feared. His suit wasn't as crisp. His posture wasn't as arrogant. His eyes weren't as sharp. He looked like a man who had been humbled. For a moment our eyes met. He gave me a small nod, not the condescending smirk I had once known, but a silent acknowledgement. Not of defeat, but of respect. I didn't approach him. I didn't need to. Because I had already moved past him. As I stood there watching the event unfold, I realized something. Richard Carson had been a lesson, not a destination. He had been the fire that forged me, but he would never define me. I had built something bigger than revenge. I had built a future. And the best part? This was just the beginning. I once believed success was about proving people wrong. About making those who doubted me eat their words. And for a while that fueled me. But now, standing at the top, I realized something even more powerful. True success isn't about revenge. It's about building something that lasts. It's about waking up every morning with purpose, knowing that what I do matters. It's about creating opportunities not just for myself but for others. I wasn't just running a business anymore. I was shaping an industry. And that was worth more than any victory over Richard Carson. Davis Consulting wasn't just my company. It was my legacy. We had expanded into new markets, launched innovative projects, and built a reputation that outlasted any grudge. People no longer whispered about how I had stolen Carson and Company as clients. Now they talked about how I changed the game. They talked about my leadership, my innovation, and my vision. Richard Carson? He was a footnote in my story. Months after that gala, I received one last email from Richard. It was short. "Amelia, I see it now. You didn't just win. You evolved. I respect that, Richard. I smiled as I read it. Not because I needed his respect, but because it showed that even he understood. I had moved on. And with that, I closed the email, deleting it without another thought. Because the truth was simple. I had outgrown the war. No. I was too busy building the future to look back. If there's one lesson I learned, it's this. Don't chase revenge. Chase greatness. Because in the end, the best revenge isn't watching someone else fail. It's watching yourself thrive. And that's exactly what I plan to keep doing. Because this journey was far from over.